All right, everybody. How's everyone doing tonight? Great. Tuesday, yeah. Well, I'm Curtis Bergh, and we have Steve Melhuish, co-founder of PropertyGuru. I got the name right. I've been practicing for the last 10 minutes. Yeah, it's been about a month since we all last got together with Zendesk and McKell-Swain. PropertyGuru and Steve, you don't really need much of an introduction. If you've been looking for a house, either buying or selling, you've at one point or another probably come across doing some research on PropertyGuru. So I think a lot of you would be very familiar with the site. Started 10 years ago and has seen pretty tremendous growth. But what's really interesting, and we were talking about that this morning, is you sort of accidentally started and kind of fell into finding this opportunity. Take us back to your trips around Southeast Asia and settling here in Singapore and discovering that there was a big opportunity for what PropertyGuru does.
Hi everybody, I'm Steve. I'm really happy to be here, so thanks for having me. Despite the fact I blew you guys out, I guess, a couple of months ago. Yeah. Apologies for that.
Well, he's back in good health, so let's give him a round of applause. It's good to see you healthy and everything.
This is what happens when you get to my age and things start going pretty wrong. So I'm probably the oldest person in this room, I think, maybe. Oh no, okay. Well, okay. So what was great? Oh yes, right. How do we start? So, I guess the first thing was Southeast Asia. I was living in London before coming here. I was doing a bit of entrepreneurial stuff. I was working in an investment bank, helping raise money for digital media startups. And I decided to take 6 months out and went traveling with my girlfriend and now wife around Southeast Asia. So we did 6 months in Nepal for 4 or 5 weeks, in Myanmar for 4 or 5 weeks, Laos, Cambodia, etc. And kind of fell in love with Southeast Asia and said, okay, so when I got home, I said, digital media, startup, Asia. So I was going backwards and forwards to Shanghai, looking to talk to startups and digital media and sort of networking. And then my wife's company had a reorganization and everyone had to reapply for their job in London. And so she reapplied for the job in Singapore. And then, I made a small investment in a company which is a mobile comics business, and I was asked to come and help support it and then run it, and then ended up running it, and then the founders fell out with the shareholders, and there's a shell of a business left. This was 2005, 2006, and for those who remember back that far, 10 years ago, the whole property market had been pretty dead for about 10 years, and it just took off. Population grew from 4.5 to 5.5 million very quickly, and there was a massive housing shortage, and you had this big en bloc fever, enforced block sale, where the developer goes to all the residents and owners of the property and gets 80% of them to sell. And then the remaining 20% are forced to sell. And I was, with my wife, renting this beautiful property, very old condo overlooking Istana, just off Orchard Road. And it was just beautiful. And we had to move out super, super fast. And so the first thing I did was to go online, because Singapore was, in my eyes, looked quite high-tech. And I was surprised that there was nothing online in 2006, and it was a bit of a surprise to me because everyone I spoke to was absolutely obsessed with property, whether the taxi drivers or the shopkeepers or people I was working with, all around property. So it got me a little bit intrigued because infrastructure looked quite good. Broadband was there. You started seeing people doing internet banking. You saw AirAsia was starting. E-commerce was, in those days, eBay. If anybody remembers this company called eBay, that was e-commerce in those days. But you had the emergence, it looked like, of consumer online adoption. So I researched it a bit more and saw that around the world, Australia, France, Germany, UK, Japan, China, these property portals had been around for about 8, 9, 10 years, and they were doing 50%, 60%, 70%, sometimes 80% net profit. Cash generative, very profitable businesses and very successful. So I thought, okay, this looks like an interesting opportunity. There was obsession with property.
You had the aha moment.
Yeah, I had the aha moment. And then I started to look at the markets in Southeast Asia and, 600 million population, and the population's growing by 8 million every single year. As a young population moving into the workforce, starting to work, who are going to buy a property in the next 5, 10 years. and this urbanization taking place. So Singapore had grown, by 25% very quickly. KL had gone from about 5%, so 5 million people to 8 million people. Jakarta's probably 20 million people now. And so the big cities were growing very rapidly. Emerging markets, GDP growth, all that kind of stuff. All the macro stuff looked really exciting. And the business model looked really exciting, very, very profitable businesses. And so it seemed like a good idea. So with zero real estate interest, let alone knowledge, I decided to sort of embark on that. And I pitched it to an investor friend of mine who was also involved in the mobile comics business. And he introduced me to my co-founder. They both went to INSEAD together. And Yanni is his name. And he's a computer geek. He's a techie. And he was working 5 days a week in India, coming back at the weekends because he was dating a real estate agent, now married and now with a kid. And it's a female and he's a male. So, so we started off working part-time, but then very quickly realized 2007, if you're going to do it properly, you've just got to go full-time. And then full-time for us meant all in. Yeah, all in.
And you didn't raise any money for the first 18 months. You just bootstrapped it and, ramen noodles and bread for maybe not that extreme, but that's something that a lot of, entrepreneurs face quite regularly. What were those first 18 months like before, you actually said, okay, we got to go out and maybe raise outside capital?
They were pretty tough. I'd say that you're right, we had no money. So everything was done on a shoestring. And everything was bootstrapped. We had no brand, no cash, kind of an office, but not really. And so we had to try and do it everything very cheaply. So that was pretty tough. And so trying to get staff was hard. So obviously we didn't pay salaries. We paid, bonuses or whatever else based on performance. Obviously the quality of the staff is a bit questionable those days because just anyone who'd work for you for a very small amount of money or zero is the people who we actually managed to attract. And of course, that wasn't necessarily always the best people. And we just did things very, very smartly in those days. And I guess we just kind of carried on throughout the running of the business. But so the early days were very scrappy. So, our business is two-sided business model. So on the one side, consumers looking for property, and the other side, the advertisers. But of course, the advertisers are not going to come to you unless you have the consumers. The consumers are not going to come to you unless you have some content. And of course, didn't have either, right? So what we did was just secretly in this room, we took something called the newspapers. I'm not sure if you remember these things. They had some property information in. In fact, all the properties in Singapore were in this newspaper. So we paid somebody about $5 or $10 to take the newspaper information and give it to us in digital format. And you can imagine if you pay someone $5 or $10 there or thereabouts, then the quality of the information was not great. And so we had listings. We had about 17,000 properties. All pretty much had come some way from the newspapers. But instead of like 500,000, it was maybe 5,000. Instead of maybe 500,000, it was 5 million. Instead of rental, it was sale. So there were a lot of mistakes. But we had some content. And we then started, because there was no real competition in those days, we had got some organic traffic, and we spent a very small amount of money on Google. Because CPC rates were very low because, again, there was no competition. So we were able to get a little bit of traffic and a little bit of content. And then we started getting these very irate real estate agents phoning us up going, what the? What's going on? I've just had this customer phone me up and once interested in my property for 500,000, but it's actually 5 million and vice versa. And I got a bit upset, but then they got intrigued and said, what is this thing called PropertyGuru? And that kind of sort of piqued a little bit of interest. And so we said, okay, on day one, we want to monetize this business. So whilst the consumers can use it for free, our business model relies on making some money, and we're not a charity, you need to make some money. So we decided to have a very simple, frictionless or very low friction business model, which was basically $50. And for $50, you could advertise as much as you want, but your properties would be at the top compared to the crappy newspaper digitized listings. And so then they started getting leads, they started getting transactions, and they obviously sold. And then they told their friends, and their friends decided to join in as well. And so at the end of the first year, we had 1,000 agents who were paying to advertise, albeit $50. But that really got things going. And so the combination of that, then we sort of demonstrated that there was a business model here that would work because we had 1,000 paying agents and the traffic was growing. I think at the end of that first year we had There wasn't very many. It was like 50 or 80,000 people a month using the service. So consumers were using it, agents were using, and they were getting transactions. So we were able to then go out to what was a non-existent investor community in 2008. And basically there were 2 angel funds in those days, and both of them were matched with Spring. And we'd selected one of them after a long period of time, and then went through the process, and then basically Spring decided to renegotiate the valuation after 6 months, and then we went back to some of the other investors and said, like, how about we just do it without Spring, because we'd gone through 6 months of hoops. And then we did it with those guys, and those guys, put anywhere between $50,000 to $1 million in. The guys who put $50,000 in, 5 or 6 years later, made $2 million. So they made a good return.
It's pretty good. What was the impetus to drive that, search for outside capital? Was there a point that you can pinpoint where you said, you know what, we got to go out and actually get some outside money here?
Apart from food and where to live, yeah. It was really about, so the first stage was just about trying to prove the business model. Can we get the business model working? And we kind of demonstrated that, and really to take it to the next stage. The barriers to entry, let's face it, in this area are almost non-existent. It takes you a week to get a website up, and there are ways of just getting listings. And so you get a website, listings up, anyone can do it, very low barriers to entry. So how do you build your barrier to entry? You build your barrier to entry by, just scaling a little bit faster and building, first of all, brand preference, and also then building, some relationships with some of your clients, and it kind of then supports the consumer side and also the advertiser side. So to do that, then we needed to raise some money, and we raised fairly small amount, $1.2 million, which gave us a little bit to then hire a few staff, and so went to about 15 or 16 staff then, and at that point. Spent a little bit of money on advertising, so I think we're the first digital company to do any kind of advertising on taxis, which seemed like a stupid idea for many, but for us, the agents were driving, the consumers were driving. It seemed like a very effective way of advertising, and that kind of proved itself because we saw that in 2009, one of the fastest growing search terms in Google was PropertyGuru, and we attribute that to the online, offline branding. So a bit around branding, a bit around people were the key areas, and the bulk of the people were around innovation. So spent a lot of stuff around experimenting in those days.
Right. And you've gone through 4 rounds of fundraising now. So you're a seasoned pro at it. What sort of insights and wisdoms can you share with us about that fundraising process, and what change have you seen in the region and in Singapore over that 8-year period from where there was just 2 angel funds to the many opportunities that exist now?
Well, compared to then versus now, it's just night and day difference, and there's just a lot of opportunity now. Although I am seeing a little bit of a recent change in terms of investor appetite for businesses and the way to look at businesses. But the options are a lot better now in terms of seed, Series A, Series B, which didn't really exist before. So we went through effectively 3 rounds because there's the Series A round, which is the 1.2 million, which was with essentially high net worths and early stage VCs. It was all ordinary shares. We let go of only about 30% of our shares at that stage, and they did not really get involved. They were just happy for us to sit down with them on a quarterly basis and just share how the business was performing. So very hands off. When we had a real challenge and we wanted to really just bounce some ideas off, they were very supportive. Other than that, so that worked really well. And we're very fortunate that one of the bigger shareholders said, look, you're the entrepreneurs, we trust you, and by the way, it's going to be ordinary shares, no preferential rights, none of this trying to screw you guys, we're going to treat you nicely. And so then when we'd built the business into a cash flow positive and a profitable business, 2009, 2010, we kind of were always thinking about when's the right time to then move overseas. So when it got to 2011, having been just focused on Singapore up until that point and got Singapore profitable, we decided it was a good time to start thinking about overseas expansion. So we needed to raise capital for that, and we knew that the investment process historically took 12 months, but we wanted to go out sooner rather than that. So one of the investors lent us $5 million in advance of the investment coming in. So then 2011, we decided to expand with that loan, and then we had to go and raise some money to support the long-term growth of the business. And we were very fortunate because in that stage we'd gone to cash flow positive and profitable and growing super fast. And we had 11 term sheets on the table. So I think one lesson, it takes a lot longer than you expect it to. So in every case, it's almost taken a year. Even though we thought we could do it faster, even though there's a lot of interest. A lot of interest even means it gets more complicated and you want to keep the competitive tension going. Competitive tension obviously drives more choice, and if you have a lot of people interested in the business, then you can push the valuation up, and then you can negotiate a lot more. So the ideal scenario is to have a lot of options, and then to get those options means spending a year, if not more, keeping the investors happy, even when you don't need the money. So when you do need the money, you already have people who might be interested. And we still had to go and kiss a lot of frogs, to find the ones that might be the prince or the princess, in our case. And we chose at that stage. We were thinking at that stage VC would be better because we're thinking at some stage we'd go IPO. But in reality, what happened was we were having some challenges scaling the business in 2011 and 2012. And we felt that if we worked with a strategic, we'd actually be a lot better. So we were able to negotiate with Deutsche Telekom, part of the German telecoms company. They had a digital subsidiary, which is one of the largest property portals in the world. It was a few $billion turnover, I think. And we had a great relationship with the CEO and COO, and we worked very closely with them for the first 18 months until they had a complete change of strategy and they left. But that worked really, really well. Strategic investor at that point in time for us worked very well because we had free consultancy. We took the SEO experts, brought them into our business for a few weeks. We had to pay for flights and accommodation, free consultancy for those guys. They had a branding team, they had a pricing team. We didn't have any of those guys. They had an SEO team, a network security team. They took us through the whole agile process. So we got for free a lot of great consultancy, an open door. For them, it was a large company, a large corporate, which wanted to benefit from the innovation, entrepreneurial spirit of a smaller company in a fast-growing, emerging market. So it kind of worked for both sides until Deutsche Telekom sold off that business, and then they wanted to IPO that business. And then we then had 6 or 9 months of fighting with that shareholder. And it got pretty horrible because we were this minority shareholding sitting in Southeast Asia, and they wanted to IPO the core business in Germany, the core digital business in Germany. And so when it came to the last round of investment, which was in 2015, we had 2 objectives. One was a last round to take us through to cash flow positive and profitability for the whole group. And then the second objective was try and get these guys out. And we were fortunate that we had a very large shareholder who wanted to write a very large check. And we kept them at bay until the last minute and then brought them on board, which is TPG. And TPG basically cashed out Deutsche Telekom or the Scout 24 guys. But each round has been for different objectives, and we've been very fortunate that by and large, it's been a 2-way process. We've had a chance to actually assess them and choose the right investors as well. So we took a long time talking to the portfolio companies of some of these investors and to see whether it was the right ones and the culture was right and how they actually behave. Because if the culture's not right or the strategy's not right, then it's a really recipe for disaster. And we saw that with the Scout 24 guys.
Interesting. And you've been on record as saying, when you expanded into other markets, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, looking back on it, you consider it was too soon. It was a little bit of a mistake. You kind of regret it. What are some of the lessons that you learned from that you can share with us? And why do you regret it? Or
Yeah, I guess it was benefit of hindsight a little bit. So we always said that the way our business model works is you need to have strong breadth and depth in the markets. So you need to have strong brand preference. You need to carry on innovating and make sure that you have strong relationships on the advertiser side as well as on the consumer side, and build that breadth and depth rather than 10 pins on a map. So we always said that when we expand, we'll expand slowly and steadily and using a base, in this case, Singapore. And so having built Singapore into a strong base, we felt that now was the time to start thinking. So we then went around, we looked at Hong Kong, we looked at Japan, we looked at Korea, we looked at a whole bunch of markets, everything south of China and sort of east of India and north of Australia. And said that, we spoke to a few startups and early companies in these markets and liked what we saw in Malaysia and Indonesia and in Thailand. And then we got stupid and said, let's do all of them. And so we went from...
just too much at once?
No, so we went from 1 country to 4 countries in 4 months, which doesn't sound like particularly challenging. But our whole organization at that stage was focused on Singapore. Singapore product, Singapore tech, quality assurance, customer service, field sales, telesales, marketing, consumer marketing, trade marketing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everything was focused on Singapore, and Singapore was doing nice and healthy growth. And then we just said to the guys, oh, by the way, we've now got to Malaysia to do. Can you just get a website out? And by the way, the mobile apps as well. And by the way, can you hire 50 people? And by the way, can you start building a brand? And by the way, what's the pricing strategy for this market? And by the way, we have to hire these people, we have to train them. And then Thailand, and then Indonesia. And so we then went through a period of time between 2011 and 2013 where we really just stretched the hell out of our Singapore organization, too close to breaking point. We went from 60 staff at that stage to 200 staff, so triple the size in about 5 or 6 months. And very quickly, those new employees became former employees very fast because we were bringing them on board. We were not onboarding them. We were not going through a proper selection process. We were not inducting them. We were not training them. We probably didn't choose the right people because we're just rushing. And at the same time, the existing staff were getting squeezed and stretched to breaking point as well. And so we went through a period of about 2 years where a whole product innovation engine, which was driving the whole company up until that point, suddenly became the big pull on the company, and we just ground to a halt. And then the organization got really pissed off, and the morale plummeted because, when you're churning new products out and getting new stuff out and you're growing nicely, everyone loves that. But when things really ground to a halt, and then people are just so stressed to breaking point, then that's really not good. And so we really, it was a really challenging time. And so we went through that whole process. And in the middle of that process, we were doing a 12-month investment round, which went from a handful of investors to 11 to then doing Deutsche Telekom. I was going through a whole IVF fertility treatment with my wife, various countries, Singapore and London and US. And so that the whole 2011 into 2013 was just a ridiculously crazy year. And we were also just stupidly naive. We felt that having built this fantastic position in Singapore and business in Singapore, which was 90% market share of all the people looking online, and we're just going to take that business and cut and paste it and put it into all the other markets, and that's the country's done. It's completely wrong. 5 years of learning a lot of lessons the hard way. And what we then really quickly realized, painfully, was that one, the team cultures and this kind of thing are different in every market. So hiring people and how they operate and this kind of thing was one. A big lesson around property is actually quite personal. And the way in which people look for property and what they are looking for in property is very different depending on the markets. The key example of that would be like Singapore, for example. Most people know the condo because it's such a small market. I want to buy a property in the Bayshore. They go to the condo directory on PropertyGuru in Singapore, condo directory, Bayshore, choose a property they want to buy or sell, and then make inquiries from that. In Thailand, for example, that doesn't exist. In Thailand, it's all around the BTS station and the neighborhood. I want to live in Silom. I want to live in Sukhumvit. I want to live in Thong Lo. I want to live next to Asok BTS. And we hadn't catered for that. So suddenly we had to think about, well, how do we cater for that? Neighborhoods becomes very important. BTS stations becomes very important. Oh, by the way, hey, maps, quite important in Thailand. And so the way in which people were looking for was very, very different in Thailand compared to Singapore. And then in countries like Indonesia, people will buy land, then they'll buy cement, and then some of the people, their friends and family, will come along and build a house. Yeah, and that doesn't happen very much in Singapore. So the behaviour is very different. And so we went through 5 years, believe it or not, of learning the hard way, organisational structure, talent, how you manage, motivate, hire the teams in those countries, and also, more importantly, what the consumers are looking for. And that's really been the key driver for us just from start to finish. We set out to, the business was started to help the consumer. And we made a big mistake because we ignored that fact and felt that we could just copy and paste Singapore. So, yeah, learn the hard way.
And talking about, staff and talent, you've stepped aside as CEO. What was that like? Did you feel like you were losing something or giving something up? And, how did you go about, making sure that you had the right person so that you could focus on bigger, better things?
you want the official answer or the real answer?
Up to you.
Okay.
But I think I know what everyone's preference would be.
Okay, so so about two plus years ago, with our previous board, myself and my partner said, look, at some point in the future, our job as leaders in the business is to build a succession plan, and at a certain point, we need to start thinking about who's going to take over our roles and this kind of thing. That was the first thing. The second thing was when we're running and a brute force, just running, 500 miles an hour, you're thinking about day to day, week to week, month to month, maybe quarter to quarter, and under a lot of pressure to deliver and things very short term. And as a team had grown from 5 to 15 to 60 to 200 to 400, it became more and more important that actually we started thinking a little bit about leadership teams and thinking about management teams and this kind of thing, but also about succession plan. So we agreed with our board in 2014 that we should start to think about the succession plan. And the drivers for that were, one, need to build a leadership team, executive leadership team. This is basically the CFO, the CMO, someone looking after sales, head of HR, and this kind of thing. So that was the first thing. The second thing was to build a middle management team, because if you just have the executive leadership team, no middle management, they just get sucked down and they're doing stuff down here. They're not doing stuff up here, thinking about the strategy and this kind of thing. So that was that. The third bit was we'd been quite successful in developing and delivering our strategy from real estate agents and brokers. So we'd gone from 1,000 to 4,000 to 10,000 to 36,000 real estate agents paying every year to use the services. But the biggest pot of money is sitting with the real estate developers, the house builders. And by the way, these guys are construction companies, bricks and mortar, many cases family-owned businesses, patriarch, running the business in their 60s and 70s in many cases, been doing the same thing the same way for the last 30 or 40 years. Which basically means I buy land, I take some money from the bank to finance the development of the land, I build it, I sell it, and by the way, I just spend a lot of money on a newspaper advert or billboards. But of course, consumers moved online, but the advertisers, particularly those guys, are still in traditional. So we said we had to try and conquer that strategy. So that was a 2-year process. It was with executive leadership team, middle management, and get that in place. And then, of course, the fourth thing was to find a successor. So we started that process about 18 months ago. We were surprised at actually how reasonably easy it was to find a CEO successor. Because what we realized actually is there is quite a lot of talent at that level working for, in many cases, US MNC tech companies who are increasingly frustrated about the ability to influence and control their destiny in Asia, because the center of gravity is sitting in the US. You've got to play the politics game, lots of matrix organization, politics and bureaucracy sitting in the headquarters in the US in many cases. And there were a lot of people in the region who actually were struggling with that, and they want to take control. And we said, look, you're going to run a team of 450 people. You're going to be responsible for product, for tech, the whole organization, the strategy, running that team and delivering. And actually, we were surprised that we got some really good talent. So finding that person wasn't too hard, and we were really fortunate that Harry Krishnan decided to join us about 18 months ago. And so he'd built and then was running Asia Pac, LinkedIn, 1,500 people, understood tech. He'd come from a travel website, it was actually called Travel Guru, and now it's in PropertyGuru. Travel, obviously recruitment and this kind of thing. It was work from MySpace, in the good old days, and Cisco and Yahoo. So he had a lot of tech background and also strong leader and built the business. And so we were able to identify him and bring him on board. Someone I've known for 4 years, and my partner's known for about 10 or 11 years because they did the MBA at INSEAD together. So we were able to bring that person on board as well, and in January, initially as a chief business officer, and then in September handed over. So there's been a lot of coaching of external coach for him, for me, and my partner separately, and then also together to mitigate the risk. And bringing him on board as the chief business officer for the first 9 months also gave us a bit of risk mitigation to make sure that there was no damage done. But at the same time, for him, gave him the opportunity to then build a team and demonstrate some success and relationships and this kind of thing. And that worked really well. And so between 1st of January, started to hand over some of my responsibilities as a chief business officer, then CEO in September last year. And then I guess between September and the last sort of 3 months or so, been handing over and that kind of thing. So what that's done is freed up more of my time to think about all the things that I was supposed to be doing the last 2 years, which is always at the bottom of the pile, which is around next 2 or 3 years, how are we going to help with the next stage of transforming the consumer experience from a property point of view? Because we have helped quite a lot, but it's actually still a lot of work to do. So that's the first thing. Secondly, around business development, M&A, we've done 3 or 4 M&A activities in the last 2 years or so, and also just thinking about optionality and building what's the future for the shareholders and the board. In the next 2 or 3 years, what do we want to take the business in terms of, is it IPO or this kind of thing. And it's actually a full-time job, as I've realized now. And I'm spending a lot of time on that. I'm also spending a lot of time talking to these multi-millionaires and billionaire family owners who have these property developers and trying to persuade them to try and go online as well, which is quite an interesting process. So that's the official. I guess the unofficial, the real piece is actually, I knew it was going to be tough personally because I'm a perfectionist control freak, and I've been working in and around 24/7 PropertyGuru for the last 9 years, and to let go of the baby after 9 years personally was actually very challenging. I knew it was going to be. I sat down with other founders who'd gone through the same process, and they'd kind of relayed stuff like crisis of purpose, mourning period, all this kind of really emotive language. And I thought, yeah, I know it's going to be bad, but it's not really going to be that bad. But yeah, it has been pretty much that bad. My wife said, look, you've done everything you wanted to do, but you're the saddest you've been ever through this process. But I'm coming out of that. I'm coming out of that process now. So that was probably about 4 or 5 months ago. I was feeling pretty low, going through this change process myself and dealing with it and coaching myself. But no, it's really good now. So yeah, I'm happy.
That's great. It's quite a story that you got. I'm going to open up to the floor now for some questions. Anybody? Here we go.
You mentioned earlier on that you've seen some changes in the market recently in terms of investment. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think if you go back to when we started, there was almost non-existent investment in any kind of structure or ways. Just these two angel funds. You started to get a little bit of grant activity, like 50K grants and this kind of thing, 8-9 years ago. And then over the last, I guess, 5 years or so, the government particularly has led a lot of change and support in terms of incubators, in terms of really increasing the size of potential investments, matching, the NRF funds, the whole co-working space. The whole ecosystem has changed a lot. You've got large VCs coming in, US VCs coming in. You've got a lot of homegrown VCs. And so the whole investment community has blossomed, I believe, and also has a startup community blossomed. What I've seen just talking to startups that I know and are coaching and helping in the last sort of 12, 18 months or so is a bit more of a return to reality. I think there was a period of time, probably about 18 months, 2 years ago, when there was so much money floating around, and there was more money than actually good deals, and therefore a lot of deals got funded that perhaps maybe shouldn't have got funded. And then I guess we've seen a little bit of a backlash or a bit of a cooling down in markets like India and also Southeast Asia, particularly around things like e-commerce. And valuations expectations, and a bit more focus around back to basics in terms of path to profitability. So I think the sentiment is a little bit cooler now and a little bit more realistic now than it was 12, 18 months ago. So I think businesses that have strong fundamentals are still getting funded, but businesses that actually also look pretty good but just need a bit more runway struggle to raise. And there's a few examples around. Including companies like Redmark, for example, which didn't quite make it. That's a shame because that business, for example, was just an awesome business and it was just flying. It just needed a bit more runway. But the appetite suddenly went very cold on e-commerce. And they got burnt as a result of that. So, and there are other companies that I know have kind of gone through the same sort of process. So yeah, I think it's not a bad thing though either. I think it'll be better for the community, for the startup community, that investors are a little bit more realistic. Not sure if I answered your question there.
If you could just also say your name and where you're from, which company you're with, if you are with one, before you ask your question, that'd be great.
Hi, so I'm Sue from Global Fashion Group. So my question for you is, what would be a piece of advice you would give to startup entrepreneurs who want to be successful in Singapore, given the investment cold period we are having now?
I guess it depends on the stage of the business, but I think the most fundamental. I also do a small number of investments myself, and I guess the things I look at for that would be around one: is it addressing a big pain? What is the real? Because I talk to a lot of companies who, for example, around artificial intelligence. They're in artificial intelligence, but almost have a technology looking for a solution. And what I look for, and I think what I've personally advise founders is what pain are you addressing? What's the real challenge? Is it big pain? And is it something which you feel you can address? That's the first thing. The second thing I also see a little bit recently is I've got a slide where I now want to raise some money on a 20 million valuation. As opposed to showing a little bit of traction. So, but a little bit of skin in the game, and then also show a little bit of traction. So those are the two things which I think for me would be the most important. And I think thirdly, there's no substitute for hard work. I think a lot of people want to do it a little bit the quick way. And I guess my personal experience with startups and also my own business has been, there is a grind. There's a startup grind. And, you've got to put the full hard 9 yards in and really, really put the effort in to do that. So I think there's no substitute for that hard work. So those would probably be the three things. And other than that, we'll go for it. It doesn't matter if you make mistakes and fail, just go for it, basically.
Hi, I'm Shweta from Comcap. My question to you is, how do you deal with competition, and how do you differentiate yourself when there are so many other players in the market?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's one I get a lot, actually. I think the first thing to say is that competition just generally is really, really good. It just keeps you on your toes and stops you getting complacent. And we've had competition every single year, and it just carries on since we started. So if I give you an example, so 2007, when we decided to have this idea and we said, okay, let's start this idea, there was no one doing this. And then this company called SPH, Singapore Press Holdings, a $1 billion company which had everything to lose in property, launched this thing called ST701 and threw a lot of money at it in 2007. And then this company called MediaCorp, which runs TV company in Singapore, launched Mocha.com. And then this company called iProperty launched a property vertical. And that was in space of about 4 months in 2007, just as we were launching. So that was pretty intimidating. That's pretty scary. And that kind of thing has almost happened every single year. Since, we had new competition coming in, they're going to change everything, it's going to revolutionize everything, and they're going to spend a lot of money, and there's a big blast, and then 2 years later it's kind of gone, and another competition, another one, another one, another one. And it just carries on. So that's in our direct space. From a competition from a money point of view, my challenge is still the bulk of it sits in traditional media. Even though the eyeballs are all online, pretty much, still a lot of the money is still going into some of the traditional media. Now, we'll move in the whole of the rest of the world, in more mature markets, it has moved, right? So 60% of all property advertising in Australia is online. 60% of all property advertising in UK is all online. 50% in France, 40% in Germany, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In Singapore, it's about 12 or 13%. So money is still sitting in traditional media. That's another area of competition. And then the other bit is really, which I think is probably the most fundamental, and that's the same for all of us in this room, is this smartphone. So, it didn't used to exist, now it does exist, and by the way, we spend our whole life on these things. And there's a company called Uber, which you might have heard of, which many people use to book taxis. Didn't used to exist, now the user experience is great. I want a taxi, bang, I get a taxi instantaneously. I've got all my track record in terms of all my history. It arrives on time, you can see where it's coming from normally. It's great service, right? Service called Netflix. not only does it now I can access any TV show or film that I've ever wanted to access, but it also personalizes what TV shows I might actually be interested in based on my behavior. So that's personalization. E-commerce payment, e-wallet payment, whether it's Lazada or Amazon, using e-commerce to buy stuff. You've got Airbnb setting a standard in terms of just user experience and the level of content you get. So it's shaping just consumer expectations. So when any of us in this room, whether you're a traditional company or a digital company or anything, want to do something with consumers, that's the expectation. It's instantaneous, it's fast, it's super easy to use, in many cases it's free, and by the way, it learns behavior and this kind of stuff. So that's kind of what consumers minimum expect these days. So when it comes to us, we say, okay, so you're going to buy a property, it's $1 million. It's probably the single biggest thing you're going to spend any kind of money on. How do you kind of get to that kind of level of trust in a digital environment? And that's kind of what keeps us awake. So, we set out by saying the number one priority 8-9 years ago was help the consumer navigate this really complex, frustrating, scary process called property. You're relying on your friends and your family to tell you what to do, and agents trying to sell you something, developers trying to sell you something. It's very confusing, very complex. You don't know which neighborhoods, what prices, all that kind of stuff. Compared to now, all the properties online. We've published 600 articles. We do drone videos and neighborhood videos and shows you what's like on the 60th floor for the 50th floor. We do all that kind of stuff. A lot more easy to navigate the property market than it was 8 or 9 years ago. Is it easy? Can I buy my property online today? Do I instantaneously get a loan? No, it's still a nightmare. I mean, the agents, for example, are in many cases not great. The developers, in many cases, not great. You make an inquiry, they don't respond. And so, that's what's keeping us awake. And that's driven by, consumer expectations and what's expected these days from digital services, which is I want to be able to trust. And at the moment, the level of trust when you're spending $1 million has to be really 10 times higher than if you're spending $100 on an Airbnb or $10 on an Uber. You're spending $1 million. It's got to be great, and so that's what keeps us awake.
Hi, I'm Carsten. I'm working for a company called Diligence. Somewhere upstairs here, we are a data consulting company. You talked about all the technology just now, so my question is, how much is technology in the past and specifically in the future influencing the outcome of any startup? How is it an averager, or is it a differentiator, or is it something that has to be there and it's only the creativity, the business creativity, the creativity how to use it as a tool? How will things like cloud availability, those things influence the ability to start up things, but also how you see how the world gets interconnected, how this will shape and form potential next startups, any organization.
Wow, okay, that's good. Can I just say yes to that? So I think the first was around the role of technology. I think obviously the role of technology, again, going back to one of the points I was making before, I think technology for the sake of technology is not what it's about. Technology is an enabler to help solve a problem and help solve a pain. And the fantastic thing is that new technologies are constantly evolving, and new devices and virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence platforms are becoming more and more widely available for companies such as ourselves and other startups to then ride on cost effectively. So previously, if you wanted to do email, for example, you had to get an expensive enterprise server and do all that kind of stuff, and now you can just have it have it pay as you use and CRM pay as you use. So the ability to scale your business on a operating cost model is a lot easier. So I think technology has helped that, and from a cost point of view, it's just come down. So I see technology as a big enabler for us, but at the same time, there's a lot of hype around some technologies, and And I reflect a little bit, and I'm very old, I reflect a little bit on 2001 when I was actually working in telecoms. And the company I was working for basically went through this big culture change program. They put the whole organization through this culture change program because they said the future of the world is going to be this thing called PI. People, information, entertainment in the palm of your hand, 2001. They basically decided to sell off some of the core assets, invest heavily in smart, in those days, WAP-type devices, big compact things. They'd have this thing called SME, ASP services, which were actually cloud, and invested all that money in 2001. And by the way, what a great idea. It just took 15 years before it actually happened. And they bet 2001. But by the way, it's actually a lot bigger than probably anyone ever thought. So the big lesson there is people expect things to happen sooner than they do, generally. But when they do happen, they tend to be bigger than anyone ever expects. So then you start thinking, in our case, the things like artificial intelligence, what role does that play? In fact, we're rolling out artificial intelligence. We're using artificial intelligence platform at the moment to try and improve the content quality. So with deep mining of the photographs real time, so that any poor photographs or non-property related photographs or photographs of agents' faces get blocked. You know, a montage of trees gets blocked. That kind of stuff, you know. So we're able now to use, in this case, Google TensorFlow to do that. We're able to experiment with virtual reality. Last year we ran a summer of virtual reality and did some virtual reality experiments. But you know, I don't know how, well, you guys are probably different than normal audience I talk to, but how many people here have got virtual reality headsets? Okay, a few of you, okay. Normally I do this, it's like nobody, but everyone's got smartphones. So the adoption is still not quite there yet. And I think until there's a real killer application, for example, for things like augmented reality and virtual reality, which will probably be gaming, or pornography, one of the two, will drive adoption of some of these technologies. But again, we're experimenting, we're learning, we're trying to work out, how could it be used. And I firmly believe that, for example, virtual reality will play, or augmented reality, or combination, will play a role in the future in the case of property. So a property developer spends a lot of money doing market research in a one-dimensional survey about building a property and what kind of property should we build, when actually you could give them a virtual reality headset and they can experience it and go, oh, I don't like that very much. Can you move the wall here, please, or bigger room or whatever, and save a lot of money or sell fast or at more profit. Or instead of having a show flat, spend $1 million on a show flat, or have virtual reality so the whole family can sit in their living room and experience not just the property itself, but walking up to the property, walking around the property, walking to the local shops, the whole experience, as a family at home, which today you can't do. You go to this very structured, small show flat, which showcases one or two rooms of a property in a kind of weird cut-off kind of way. And so I think that technology will play a role, particularly in my industry, as an enabler to help with the whole property process and finding the right property and choosing the right property. Yeah, in a similar way, you have companies who do leasing contracts on cars for rideshare into Uber or into Grab drivers and building that community. Then you have things like, for example, the whole Airbnb community around laundry services, maintenance services, and this kind of thing. Probably, at some point, those guys will start to roll up the value chain. So initially you'll have these little ecosystems and cottage industries evolving, and then probably at some point they'll get absorbed into the bigger machine, I suspect.
My name is Shish. It's a follow-up to her question earlier. So you said SPH and MediaCorp came into that field around 2007. What made PropertyGuru to survive and thrive, and what made them fail over a period of time? So just some insights over there. And 99CO is doing pretty well. So how do you differentiate versus 99CO? So what is your game plan versus them or any other player in future?
Sure. So I think the first thing is, how do we manage to, take on the big guys? I think fundamentally it's just about smart people. We're obviously smart and they're not. No, I'm only joking. I've got a lot of respect for those guys. Obviously it's a tremendous business they've built, and I think the challenge is a little bit around. We, for the first 5 or 6 years, just lived and breathed. We worked 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, totally focused on this one single business. And for those guys, it was a little bit of an adjunct, a little bit of an experiment. And it was more around protecting the core business rather than trying to cannibalize the core business. And I guess until that kind of realization or kind of drive happens, and perhaps the heart's not in it, because it's obviously a big decision to kill your core business. So, at times we faced, spends of, 10x versus what we were spending in terms of marketing. At one point, someone said, "Oh, what's this taxi and bus company that's going around called ST Property?" And because it basically had every single outdoor media was ST Property and spending a lot of money. But I guess, I guess the key lesson for us is stay focused around trying to solve that consumer problem and innovating. So, just constant improvement, looking at the data, lead conversion, optimization, improving it, new versions of the mobile apps every few months for the agents and also for the consumers. Just keep improving. And that is our, is our mantra, which is the day that you stop innovating is the day that you start dying. And we just carry on. We just have to carry on. And that's one of the challenges, just got to carry on innovating, because the competition is, as I just talked about, it's not just a direct competition or the indirect competition, but also like just other services which are shaping people's expectations. I think in terms of Singapore, we've seen every year or every 2 years there's been new players coming on. Through that whole process, we've just stayed very focused on doing the core business as well as we possibly can, and carry on innovating and evolving the business. And that's meant that despite over the last 3 years, despite any kind of competition, our market share has stayed around 85% of all the people who are looking for property online are using PropertyGuru, and then the remaining 15% is 5 players, and some of them sometimes up, sometimes down, but generally speaking, there's a basket full of players. We think that there is room for 2 players in most of the markets, and some big markets maybe even 3 players. The market's growing. We have, I think, 5 million people in Singapore monthly visitors. If you say that unique devices is about just over 2, and maybe everyone's got 2 devices, is 1 million individuals. That's 1 million out of a population of about 4 million adults. It's on PropertyGuru every single month. And it's kind of similar story. We have 23 million people now using our services across all the markets. But we have to carry on innovating. That's the only way. You've got to carry on investing, carry on innovating, and just go back to what pain are we trying to solve. And for us, it's this nightmare process around navigating the property market and helping people make better decisions and more confident decisions, and empowering them with information. That's what drives us. And so, we carry on doing that.
Take a couple more questions.
Hi, my name is Alyssa. I come from a little startup called Google.
I think I've heard of it before. Yeah,
I know, it's a little startup, right? So my question would be, you've experienced a lot entering all different markets from Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore. I wanted to know how you feel the startup ecosystems are different from one country to the other.
Yeah, good question. It's not a area that I know particularly well, to be frank. So I'm not spending a huge amount of my time networking and exploring what's going on in the startup community in all these countries. What I see is a very interesting startup community in Indonesia taking place, but I also see a lot of competition, and I also see a lot of money floating around. So a lot of people go into Indonesia, and I think Indonesia is a very exciting market and will be a very exciting market. There are some people who say Indonesia's the land of the future when it comes to building businesses. It takes time. Certainly from my own experience, I think it takes time, but I think the opportunity is there for sure, because it's an emerging market, it's very young, population's high, it's urbanizing. And so the fundamentals are really, really strong, and I think the startup community has got a lot of money floating around, and actually some super smart people. I've been to some really, really interesting startups in Indonesia, and I like what I see from some of the individuals. I think Malaysia is a little bit further behind, but starting to show some real signs of traction. I've invested in a Malaysian startup, and which is a financial fintech, branded as fintech now, business, a company called Genexo, which is the market leader from a financial comparison point of view, but also doing all the back office processing, etc., for banks in Malaysia. And I like what's happening in Malaysia, but I think it's a little bit earlier stage still. And then recently, so last week and the week before, I was doing some startup activity in Bangkok. And Bangkok's really, really early stage, but I just see this energy from the founders I've met there. And so I think Thailand will be one of the big surprises. I think they're very early stage still compared to the other markets. There isn't really investment. yet in that market. So there are one or two players who are investing, and they're just getting the cream of the opportunities. They have almost a monopoly in Thailand. If any investors here, by the way, I'd definitely consider looking at Thailand, because there is just a real shortage of potential investors in Thailand, but some fantastic, creative, hungry entrepreneurs in Thailand. And then we've just recently gone to Vietnam, and I think Vietnam don't really know the startup community at all in Vietnam yet. But I suspect that Vietnam will be one of the fastest growing. I haven't really answered your question. I bluffed my way through that completely. I don't really know the market as well.
There's a large microbrewery scene in Ho Chi Minh City that's popping
Excellent.
up. So there's a startup opportunity.
Okay.
We got another one.
Hi, Steve. My name is Sharif, and I'm really from a small startup called LifeStack. So obviously no one said of that. So the question I have is, in the past few years, where every year you would see new competition crop up, and there's new opportunities that arise in the horizon, I'm pretty sure you probably had temptations to, for lack of better words, pivot or be distracted by some of the shiny objects around. Maybe advisors might have told you, you should prioritize this over that. But what is your thought process behind making sure that you can stay to your true north, whatever that is?
Okay. I'd actually flip it the other way around. I'd say, at least myself and my co-founders, entrepreneurs, excuse me, like to do everything. See opportunities, see the shiny object, let's go after that, let's go after that, go after that. And you can do that when you're still small. And so, in 2010, 2011, we launched a print product, we launched an events platform, we launched Commercial Guru, we launched something called Loan Guru, a lot of experimentation, and we're just doing everything all at the same time, which is just great fun as an entrepreneur, and you just get to play and just do lots of different things. At the same time, you start stretching the organization. So as the organization gets to a bigger stage, you have to be a little bit more mindful and choiceful over what you work on. And it becomes even more and more important, and also extremely tough, to prioritize. And it's been one of the personal challenges for me, is what do you start saying no to? Because I kind of want to do everything. And I think it's one of the most important things when a business starts to scale, to focus on the core. Because there are lots of shiny objects, and there are lots of distractions. And yes, things look interesting. If you don't explore, you don't know what you're missing, because actually it could be something. It could be the next big thing. But at the same time, if you really focus, and just focus on probably three things at any one time, three big things at any one time, and get the whole organization focused on those three big things and aligned on those three things, the business, in my experience, will fly. But it has been a bit of a challenge for us. Our advisors and our board, for example, we've been very lucky. They haven't interfered at all on that perspective. They kind of trust, you run the business, etc. When it talks about, long-term, maybe big M&A opportunities, then of course they get involved. But when it comes to, what we should be doing in terms of business, they leave it to us. And I've been very fortunate from that point of view. And I would encourage any startup to try and keep their investors, by and large, at bay, because I think, generally speaking, the founders know the business far better and are closer to the customer than a shareholder. And actually, in many cases, the shareholder's interests are not always aligned necessarily to the founder of the company, because they're there to make money. And you might be there to make a business long term. So there's always going to be a slight tension. So I think healthy no to the board sometimes, or shareholders sometimes, is a good thing to do. And also be, if you can, choiceful and focused on a small number of priorities. And if you focus on those and get the whole organization, then the business can fly.
One more question. Here in the back. Oh, yeah, we'll take two. Yeah, you go first.
Steve, Richard here from V360 Property. Okay. Okay, my question is, I get to know that iProperty was in the market before PropertyGuru was found on that time. So what do you do that is so unique with the low funding that you took over the market share of iProperty?
Similar to what I said about SPH earlier on, MediaCorp. No, not really. So, yeah, they started about the same sort of time. Their strategy was a little bit different to ours. So they started off in Malaysia, and then they expanded to 10 countries very, very fast, just at the very start, so 2006, 2007. And so they went Malaysia, Singapore, Macau, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Philippines, Indonesia, etc., very, very quickly. And I think in hindsight, maybe what the mistake they made in that case was to go too thin. Because at one point they looked like they were neck and neck with us in Singapore, but I think they just spread themselves a little bit too thin. But that's just from the outside looking in. That's from the outside looking in. That's how it looked like from us.
Well, thank you very much for being here. I mean, we could probably go all night with property-related questions and also entrepreneurship-related questions, but we really appreciate you coming in and sharing your story with us at Startup Grind.
Thanks very much for having me.
Round of applause for Steve.
Thank you. Thanks, Curtis. Thank you.